A soldier's family shamed after inheriting a rundown gas station. Then they discovered this. The sign flickered above the old gas station like a ghost from a long-forgotten past. Cobwebs framed windows that hadn't been washed in years. Each crack in the pavement seemed to whisper stories of better days, days when this place was bustling with life, a time before the world moved on without it. Now, it sat merely as a monument to failure, and as the Thompson family rolled into town, they felt the weight of its legacy pressing down on them. There was a mix of shame and intrigue bubbling inside them. They were now the owners of this rundown relic. As they stepped out of their truck, the thick, oily scent of gasoline mixed with something else, a sweet metallic hint that made the hair on Richard Thompson's neck stand on end. He glanced over to his teenage daughter, Lily, who was already staring into the shadows between the old vending machines. She had that look in her eyes, the one that said she sensed something was off, a creeping unease in the air. Beside her, his wife, Margaret, held his hand tightly. Her palms were clammy, her breath quickening. Why were they nervous? They weren't sure. The deeper they ventured inside, the stranger it became. The air felt heavy, laden with secrets. Richard couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Old gas pumps lined the walls, but they weren't the only things. An ancient-looking register sat ominously in the corner, dust-coated but still intact. It seemed to hum softly, beckoning him closer, as if the ghosts of customers long past were trapped inside waiting for their final transactions. Just think of the potential, Richard told himself, trying to ignore the eerie tap-tap-tap sound coming from the back room. Was it just the pipes? Or was there something more, something alive? Just as Richard turned to suggest they explore the storeroom, a loud crash made them all jump. Lily's eyes widened, her heart racing. "Did you hear that?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf caught in a storm. The family's collective fear rippled through the air, pulling them tighter together. As they stood, frozen in uncertainty, a shiver ran down Richard's spine. "Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect." Just as Richard took a step toward the noise, a shadow darted across the wall. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. What was lurking in the dark? He couldn't ignore it any longer. "Maybe this place is haunted," he joked nervously, but no one laughed. Inside, he felt a mix of dread and adrenaline coursing through him. The weight of their new reality pressed heavier than the rusted metal surrounding them. They thought they were just inheriting a gas station, but what if it held more? What if there were secrets buried deeper than the gas tanks hidden outside? Lily said, "What if we find something dangerous?" Her words hung like a heavy fog in the air, thick with uncertainty. Just as Richard opened the door to the storeroom, a gust of wind slammed it shut, thundering like a gunshot. Silence fell. They stood still, uncertainty gripping their hearts. What lay behind that door? What had they really inherited? The answer felt just out of reach. Richard's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the door that had just slammed shut. The noise echoed through the empty gas station, mixing with the phantoms of the past. For a moment, he felt a wild urge to turn and flee, but he couldn't bring himself to abandon his family. Not now. Lily's eyes were fixed on him, wide with fear. "Dad, what was that?" she whispered, her voice barely breaking the thick tension hanging in the air. I don't know," he stammered, feeling a chill creep into his bones. "But we can't leave without finding out." Margaret squeezed his hand tighter. "Could it just be an animal or something? Maybe a raccoon?" Richard hesitated. Maybe. But deep down, he was already dismissing the thought. It was not just an animal that lurked in the shadows of this place, he felt it in his gut. Something sinister had a hold here. He took a step forward to the storeroom door, the wood splintering under his fingertips. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and cautious. The last thing he wanted was to put them in harm's way. Suddenly, a low groan emerged from beyond the door, stopping him in his tracks. It sounded almost human, but also hauntingly wrong. Richard's heart raced again, pumping raw adrenaline through his veins. Should he open the door? Should they confront whatever darkness lay beyond, or should they run while they still had the chance? They had burdened themselves with enough shame over the gas station, he couldn't let that overcome their instinct for survival. The wind howled outside, rattling the old building. With trembling hands, he pushed the door slightly. It creaked loudly in protest. "What if we just peek?" Richard murmured. Lily stepped forward, her curiosity edging past her fear. "I want to see," she said, her voice firmer than moments before. "No." Margaret gasped, finally breaking her silence. "What if it's dangerous?" But Lily, driven by youthful audacity, had already taken a step closer. "I'm not afraid," she insisted, even as the faint sound of something shifting in the room sent a shiver down her spine. Richard couldn't let her go in alone. "Okay, but stick close to me," he urged. They edged into the storeroom together, stepping into the darkness that felt suffocating. The shadows enveloped them, thick and stifling. As their eyes adjusted, they spotted the source of the noises. A box on the ground had tipped over, its contents sprawled across the floor, a tangled mess of old newspapers and dusty trinkets. The sight was strange, almost surreal, yet it seemed harmless. "See? Nothing to be scared of," Richard said, though his voice lacked conviction. He knelt to inspect the papers, half expecting some relic of the past to jump out at him. But instead, he found an envelope tucked beneath a pile of old receipts. Its edges were frayed, indicating it hadn't seen light in ages. "What is it?" Lily asked, leaning in closer. Richard carefully pried it free. The envelope felt oddly warm against his skin, an unsettling contrast to the chill in the room. He tore it open, revealing a yellowed piece of paper inscribed with strange handwriting. His eyes widened as his mind raced. This looks like a journal," he murmured, scanning the scribbled words. The tension in the air thickened around them. "It's dated back to the 1980s. And look, there's something mentioned about a hidden treasure and a curse." Both Lily and Margaret exchanged glances, the atmosphere shifting as they all realized they had stepped into something much deeper than they anticipated. The thrill of discovery battled with the primal fear that gripped them. What if this is what they meant by inheriting more than we bargained for? Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Richard could barely process the implications. The thought of treasure entangled with curses sent icy fingers crawling up his spine. Before he could reply, the door behind them suddenly slammed shut again, locking them in darkness. Panic surged through him, raw and electrifying. "We need to get out of here," Margaret shouted, but Richard's eyes were fixed on the words in the journal. What if they had stumbled onto something that could change their lives forever? Or destroy them? As Richard fumbled for the doorknob, the lights flickered back on, revealing the chilling outline of a figure by the storeroom doorway. "Looking for something?" The figure sneered, voice dripping with malice. Richard stood frozen in shock. Fear clawed at his throat. Who was this intruder? What did they want? And more importantly, what had they truly inherited? The answer loomed just out of reach. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, illuminating the cramped storeroom with the faint glow from the overhead lights, casting dark shadows that flickered like restless spirits. Richard's breath hitched in his throat as he registered the face, a gaunt man with wild eyes and a smile that curled like a serpent. "Who are you?" Richard stammered, standing protectively in front of Lily and Margaret, instinctively pushing them back toward the wall. "Just a friend," the man hissed, his voice slithering through the air. "But I see you're drawn to the treasures of this place." "Very few are. Most choose to forget." The hairs on Richard's neck stood on end. "We have no interest in anything here," he said, trying to sound firmer than he felt. Just let us go. Oh, but it's not that simple, the man replied, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, observing them like a cat with cornered mice. This place has its ways, it binds you, much like those old journals. What do you mean? Margaret's voice trembled, uncertainty creeping through her. The man smirked, and Richard felt anger bubbling beneath his surface. You really should read it. After all, your family dug it up. Did you even think to consider who it belonged to? The curse that follows? Richard's heart raced. Cursed. What kind of curse? Ah, the tragedy of it all. He stepped closer, and Richard felt the space between them shrink like a noose tightening around his neck. Those who seek the treasure find more than riches, they find doom. How do you think this gas station came to be so run down? The last owners were fools, too. Richard couldn't suppress a shiver, awareness washing over him that the man was hinting at something unthinkable. Who are you? He forced the words out, despite the gnawing fear in his gut. The sinister smile widened. Let us just call me the keeper of what's left. He paused for effect, eyes narrowing. And I'm afraid you've only begun to scratch the surface of what you've inherited. The town knows, the spirits know. There's a reason it's been abandoned. There's a reason you're not alone. Lily gasped quietly, glancing at her father, filled with a mixture of fear and unresolved curiosity. Get out while you can, the keeper continued, shaking his head mockingly. Or embrace the legacy you've unearthed. Either way, it won't end well for you. Richard felt panic start to swell again. The words sank into him like heavy stones, dragging his thoughts into dark waters. We won't listen to you. That's not going to happen. Oh, but you're already listening, he replied, a sinister satisfaction in his tone. The curse binds you now. You should feel honored to be part of something greater, or perhaps be terrified of what's yet to come. And just like that, the man seemed to dissolve into shadows, slipping out the doorway, leaving only the echo of his unsettling laughter behind. Dad, what just happened? Lily whispered, trembling. I don't know, Richard admitted, the knot in his stomach tightening. But we need to get out of here. As he rushed for the door, it swung open of its own accord, revealing the empty gas station. They stepped out into the cold night air, ready to flee, but the oppressive feeling of something lurking nearby clung to their skin. Richard turned back for a moment, glancing at the storeroom, uncertainty gnawing at his thoughts. The journal still sat on the floor, half hidden under a pile of decaying newspapers. He couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just stumbled upon a lost treasure. They may have uncovered a darker legacy. What if we're being watched? Margaret whispered, her voice quaking. Before Richard could respond, the gas station lights flickered ominously, casting elongated shadows that danced across the empty parking lot. Then, a faint whisper floated through the air, chilling Richard to his bones. You're not alone. With renewed urgency, they dashed outside, but darkness had already begun to seep into their lives, and the truth of the cursed inheritance awaited them, a sinister shadow looming just beyond their vision. What dangers lurked in the history of the gas station, dangers that were now a part of their reality? The cold air wrapped around Richard like a shroud as they stumbled into the dim parking lot, the dust swirling like memories from the past. He could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him, quickening his heart, making his senses sharpen. Glancing at Lily and Margaret, he tried to mask his fear with a determined facade. Stay close, he urged, his voice firm but laced with urgency. He led them towards the car, but as they took those few hurried steps, an unsettling feeling tugged at his gut. Something was watching them. Did you hear that? Lily's voice broke through the hush of the night, her expression wide with alarm as she pointed to the shadows behind the gas station. Richard squinted into the dark, but saw nothing. It's just the wind, he lied, though doubt gnawed at the edges of his confidence. His instincts screamed otherwise. The engine of the old sedan sputtered to life, but as he turned the key, a haunting silence fell over the parking lot. It was like the world held its breath. Come on, Richard muttered, anxiety twisting in his stomach as he turned the key again. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared angrily to life. Relief washed over him, but the joy was short-lived. "Did you lock the doors?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking, eyes darting nervously. "Of course." He hoped he sounded more certain than he felt. "We just." A loud crash echoed through the night, sending shivers spiraling down his spine. They all jumped, turning towards the gas station. Richard's heart raced as instinct propelled him out of the car. "Stay here." He rushed back towards the source of the sound, the darkness beckoning him closer. He stepped cautiously over the broken glass in the doorway, each crunch eerily amplifying the silence around him. The storeroom loomed ahead, the flickering lights casting macabre silhouettes across the walls. "Hello." He called out, his voice trembling in the stillness. There was no reply, only the distant sound of the wind howling through the cracks, intertwining with his rising dread. As he walked further inside, a glance at the floor pulled him up short. The journal. It lay there, still partially veiled by the decrepit newspapers, glowing strangely as if it held its own light. Richard approached it, the hairs on his arms rising as he reached down, feeling a familiar pull. The urge to open it was overwhelming, despite the fear that gripped him. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, urging him to uncover its secrets. Just then, a low, guttural growl rumbled from the shadows, sending icy tendrils of fear racing through him. Frozen, Richard barely dared to breathe. "Hello." He tried again, forcing conviction into his words. No answer came, only silence, and the growl grew louder closer. He turned to flee, his heart pounding like a war drum. Suddenly, the journal flipped open as if it had a life of its own. Words began to scrawl across the pages in an ink that seemed too dark, too alive. Richard shook his head, stepping back, eyes wide. "No, no, this can't be happening." The growling turned into a roar, igniting fear into every nerve ending in his body. He had to get back to Margaret and Lily. Somehow, he managed to tear himself away from the journal's deadly allure and sprinted back towards the door. He burst outside, gasping for fresh air, his mind reeling. "Dad!" Lily's worried cry pierced through the night, drawing him back to the present. "What is it?" "I think something's behind us." Richard turned, and the sight made his blood run cold. The shadows writhed and twisted as a figure formed tall and menacing, features barely visible but unmistakably human. "It's here," Margaret whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. As Richard stood transfixed, the keeper's words echoed in his mind, "You're not alone." With dread coursing through him, Richard knew they were no longer just entangled in an inheritance. They had awakened something ancient, and it was awakened with an insatiable hunger. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Lily and Margaret's hands, the three of them bolting toward the car. The figure came alive behind them, racing forward with a speed that left no doubt it wanted them. Would they escape? Or would the darkness catch them first? They raced towards the car, breathless and wild-eyed, the hairs on Richard's arms prickling as the dark figure loomed closer. The adrenaline surged through him, pushing him forward, but each step felt heavier, like he was wading through thick mud. "Faster!" he yelled, his voice raw with panic. Margaret stumbled, nearly falling, but Richard tightened his grip, pulling her back into motion. He heard the growl again, closer this time, an echo of primal fury that chased them through the night. "Unlock the door!" Lily shrieked, fumbling with the handle as Richard stumbled to the driver's side. There was no time to check if it was locked. He slammed the door open, pushing Margaret inside before looking for Lily, who was still fumbling at the back. "Come on! Get in!" he yelled, feeling the air thicken with impending dread. She dove into the seat, heart racing, and Richard slammed the door just as another growl erupted behind them, vibrating through the metal. He slid into the driver's seat, hands trembling on the wheel. Start, come on!" he muttered, twisting the key. The engine responded with a reluctant sputter, and he felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. "Please," Lily whispered, her voice shaking, and in that moment, a surge of fear coiled tightly in his chest. Just as the engine finally caught, the right side window splintered like glass, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The dark figure lunged, a face suddenly illuminated by the interior lights, eyes wide, mouth twisted into a hollow scream, nothing human left in its features. "Drive!" Margaret screamed as Richard threw the gear into reverse, spinning the car in a hasty escape. They lurched backward, gravel crunching beneath the tires, screaming into the parking lot just as the figure reached for them, its fingers clawing the air. The last sight before distance swallowed it whole was that monstrous face melting back into the shadows, an echo of their worst fears. Richard whipped the car around, the headlights slicing through the darkness. "Where do we go?" he yelled, panic flaring in his voice. "Just get away," Margaret urged, eyes darting over her shoulder. Still trembling from the close encounter, he turned onto the dimly lit road, the gas station shrinking in the rearview mirror. The weight of silence pressed down upon them, heavy and suffocating. In the absence of sound, Richard could feel his heartbeat thrumming in his ears, a drum echoing encroaching dread. "What was that?" Lily panted, her voice a mixture of confusion and fear. "I don't know," Richard replied, gripping the wheel tighter until his knuckles turned white. "But we need to find somewhere safe." They drove in silence, the forest looming on either side of the road, trees resembling shadowy sentinels. But the unease wouldn't leave. The night was filled with whispers, the wind tossing secrets from the branches overhead, echoing their own doubts. As they neared a fork in the road, Richard faced a decision. He could take the path toward town, where people might be. Safety in numbers. Or he could head deeper into the woods, into an uncertain darkness where they might find sanctuary or worse. "What if we go to town?" Lily suggested, seemingly mirroring his thoughts. "No," Margaret interjected, her voice steady. "Whatever that was, it might be following us. We should go deeper." As the option hung heavy in the air, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was a choice. It was their only path left. He made the turn toward the woods, a heavy sense of foreboding filling the car as they plunged into the unknown. The trees drew close, branches clawing at the sky, enveloping them as the road twisted deeper into the heart of what felt like another world. "Do you think we lost it?" Lily asked softly as they maneuvered deeper. "I don't know," Richard admitted, his mind racing as he fought to keep control. Suddenly, the headlights illuminated something on the side of the road, a sign barely hanging together, half covered in vines. "Welcome to Hempfort." The name sent a chill crawling down Richard's spine. "Something feels wrong," he murmured, glancing over at Margaret, who seemed equally unsettled. Then, from the trees, they heard it again. The growl echoed louder and more feral, seeping into their thoughts. It was coming back. They had awakened something, and it was relentless. "Hold on!" Richard shouted, slamming his foot on the gas pedal. But as they sped deeper into the woods, a flash of movement caught his eye, a figure darting alongside them, too swift to be anything but evil. Its hunger hadn't been sated, it was just getting started. What were they about to unleash on themselves? The engine roared, the forest speeding past like a blur of darkness and fear. Richard glanced at the rearview mirror, searching for shadows, but the road behind them swallowed everything. The growl echoed behind him, primal and unyielding, its source relentless in pursuit. "Faster!" Margaret shouted, her voice rising above the engine's roar. Panic surged through her, glancing again at the unforgiving woods closing in on either side. "Please just hold on." Richard's voice cracked as he wrestled with the steering wheel, his heart pounding against his ribcage like desperate fists. Lily whimpered softly, clenching her hands tight on her lap. "What if it finds us? What if we're not safe out here?" "Stop talking like that." Margaret snapped, a wild look in her eyes. "We need to be quiet. We can't let it know we're scared." But deep down, Richard shared the same gnawing fear. They were unprepared, swallowed by a darkness that seemed alive. The shadows weren't just a backdrop, they felt conscious, swirling with a hungry energy that pulsed, vibrating through the trees. What's that up ahead? Richard shouted, squinting against the growing darkness. A flicker of light appeared, bobbing like a beacon in the void. Could be another gas station. Lily suggested, hope lacing her words, but as they approached, Richard realized it was just an old, covered sign swaying in the wind. What does it say? Margaret leaned forward, straining to see through the thick brush. Something. Mystic Hollow. Lily gasped. There was a legend about that place, a haunting. People say it was cursed. Legends don't matter right now, Richard muttered, his focus solely on the road ahead. The moment they passed beneath the sign, the headlights flickered and the car shuddered as if the very air freaked out around them. Damn it, Richard hissed. He slammed the gas down harder, urging the car forward through the eerie shadows that surrounded them. But the breath in his chest caught as something flickered across the road ahead, a figure, barely visible. In a swift move, Richard hit the brakes. Margaret gasped, "What?" That was someone. Richard turned the steering wheel, directing the headlights toward the figure standing in the road. As the beams illuminated the area, they revealed a gaunt woman, her clothes torn and tattered, her hair a wild mess of dirt and despair. Her eyes glimmered with a blankness that made Richard's skin crawl. "Help, please," she croaked, stretching a skeletal hand toward them. "Go!" Margaret screamed, fear twisting her face into a mask of horror. But it was too late. The woman's eyes turned to slits, her body shifting as another growl erupted from the trees, the dark presence looming ever closer. "No. We can't leave her. She's trapped." Lily cried, her voice suddenly charged with urgency. "What if she's bait?" Richard whispered, a sickening tension coiling in his gut. Margaret shook her head furiously, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "Someone has to help her." Before Richard could reply, the crunch of leaves splintered the night, and another figure emerged from the trees. Then another. Richard felt his blood run cold as more of them appeared, an unsettling line of ghastly faces, eyes shimmering with something ancient and terrible. Lily now. Richard thrust the car into gear, his foot pressing down like a compulsion as he slammed the gas. The tires screeched, pulling them around the woman who was no longer reaching, but watching with an expression frozen between pleading and rage. The dark figures slipped into the shadows, their forms barely discernible but ever present. "Are they following us?" Lily asked, her voice tight. Richard glanced back. The road was empty. The woman was gone. The figures had disappeared. But the sense of dread was thick in the air, coating his throat like a bitter poison. "I don't know." The tree branches closed in around them, shadows curling and creeping closer with every passing second. As they sped deeper into the woods, Richard caught sight of a flickering light again. This time it seemed like a house, marred by age yet somehow still standing, a refuge among the haunting trees. "Maybe we can hide there," Margaret exclaimed, hope igniting her voice. "Or maybe it's a trap," Richard replied, battling the pull of desperation. "Richard," Margaret urged. "What if?" "I know," he interrupted, heart racing faster than the car. "We have to make a choice. Stay and fight or risk it all for shelter." Tension crackled in the air, the darkness only a heartbeat behind, monstrous and hungry. As the house loomed larger ahead, Richard could only wonder what might they find there waiting. What other terrors might be lurking inside? The headlights pierced through the thickening fog as they screeched to a halt in front of the dilapidated house. It stood solemnly among gnarled trees, its paint peeling like forgotten memories, windows dark and lifeless. Richard's knuckles were white around the steering wheel, heart hammering as he studied the structure that could either be salvation, or doom. "Let us go," Margaret urged, her voice clambering over the oil-slick silence of the night. The urgency in her words mingled with fear. They had to move, but what awaited them inside? Lily was already climbing out, her small frame trembling, eyes wide as she peered into the yawning shadows of the house. Richard sighed, the tension creeping up his spine, but he couldn't lose them now. They all piled out, stumbling on the uneven ground as the forest loomed like a living creature behind them. "Stick together," Richard ordered softly, the command laced with a protective undertone. They climbed the creaking porch, and each step felt like a warning against the wood's old groans, a reminder that this place had survived, like them, against all odds. "Do you think anyone's inside?" Lily whispered, glancing up at the broken facade, as though expecting a specter to materialize. "I don't know, but we need to check," Richard replied, pushing the door tentatively. It swung open with a protesting creak, revealing a dark and dust-ridden interior. The scent of dampness and decay flooded them. Shadows clung to the corners, teasing and taunting the light that dared enter. The flashlight buzzed in Richard's hand, illuminating fractured furniture draped in white sheets, creating ghostly shapes in the gloom. "Maybe we should just leave." Margaret's voice trembled, fear and regret entwined. "No. We can't," Richard insisted. "If that thing out there is following us, we'll have to find a safe spot. We could bury ourselves in here until morning." But as they moved in further, unease crawled under Richard's skin. Shadows flickered almost mockingly in the corners of his vision. The house felt wrong, not merely old but infused with something malignant, a presence lurking in the dark. "Look!" Lily pointed, her voice filled with both awe and terror as she approached an old photograph hanging crooked on the wall. "What's that?" Richard stepped closer, along with Margaret. The photograph was warped and faded, a family posed against the same backdrop as the house. A man, a woman, and 2 children. Their faces were obscured, but something in their eyes seemed alive, twisted with sorrow. Suddenly, a crash echoed from upstairs, crashing through the tension like shattered glass. Every nerve in Richard's body went rigid, a primal scream urging him to run. "Richard, please," Margaret whispered, terror glazing her eyes. "Maybe it was just the wind," he muttered, clenching his fists to steady his breathing. "We have to check. We can't ignore it." Against his instincts, he led them upstairs, each step a horrifying countdown. The air thickened around them, an electric charge buzzed with possibilities both good and bad, and dread hung in the atmosphere like a cloud ready to burst. "What if something's up there?" Lily's voice quavered, yet the determination in her gaze showed she was willing to face it, willing to stand firm. As they reached the landing, Richard caught a glimpse of a door ajar at the end of the hallway. Just as he reached for the doorknob, the temperature plummeted, a bitter draft like icy fingers brushing against his neck. "Something's wrong," he muttered, a knot forming in his gut. "Do we really have to go in?" Margaret pleaded, her voice growing faint, but before Richard could respond, an unearthly howl erupted from within the room. It reverberated off the walls like a monster's rage, freezing them in their tracks. They stared at the door, breath held, hearts pounding in unison. Was there something worse waiting for them inside? Or, perhaps, the darkness held the answers they sought. As the howl echoed once more, Richard realized they had little choice left. He turned the doorknob, adrenaline coursing through his veins, ready to confront whatever fate had in store for them. What awaited them inside? A monster, a truth, or something far more sinister? The door creaked wider, revealing a room shrouded in darkness, so thick it felt like a living entity wrapping around them. Richard's flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper decorated with faded flowers that seemed to wilt under the weight of despair. The air was stale, heavy with a mustiness that clung to their clothes and filled their lungs with dread. As they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them with a resonating thud that jolted each of them. Lily jumped, her small eyes wide, reflecting a blend of curiosity and fear. "What was that?" she whispered, looking around the room as though shadows might leap from their corners and engulf her. "Stay close to me," Richard said, his voice firm but trembling. He could feel Margaret's presence beside him, her anxious thoughts swirling like a summer storm. They all shuffled deeper into the room, hearts pounding like war drums. A large fireplace dominated one wall, the hearth long cold but still encircled by a collection of cracked chairs, each one positioned as if awaiting the return of long-lost occupants. It was unsettling, the sense of a family, perhaps once warm and alive, now vanished, leaving only echoes behind. Richard felt a chill crawl up his spine, an inexplicable sensation whispering that they were not entirely alone. "Look over there!" Lily exclaimed, her voice breaking the tension. She pointed at a tall bookshelf, its wooden surface draped in dust. Richard edged closer, scanning the titles of worn books and faded spines. One book caught his eye, standing out like a watchful eye lurking amongst the forgotten. The spine was cracked, and as he pulled it free, a latent, acrid smell wafted up a mix of mildew and something more sinister. "What did you find?" Margaret asked, her voice barely hiding her nervousness. Richard opened the book, revealing not pages of literature but a collection of clippings pinned between the leaves. Faces stared back at him, people who felt familiar, yet strangers. The name at the top of one faded photograph sent a shudder down his spine, "The Green Family, 1942. He turned to find his daughter squirming close, peering over his shoulder, while Margaret shifted, mutely acknowledging the weight of the photograph. But what made Richard's heart race wasn't the picture itself, it was the background, the same house they stood in now. "This is our house," he breathed, barely above a whisper. But as he read the small print beneath, his stomach lurched. The family was reported missing, disappeared without a trace just over 3 decades ago. Suddenly, the howl from earlier pulsed through the air again, a ghostly echo cascading through the room. Richard's heart plummeted. Was it a distant memory manifesting itself? Or were they somehow involved? Margaret shook her head, panic evident in her eyes. "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave," she urged, gripping Lily tightly. But before Richard could reply, the shaking started, a low rumble that pulsated through the very floor beneath them. Dust fluttered down from the ceiling, and the shadows deepened, dancing erratically against the walls like sinister specters trying to reach them. "Run!" Richard shouted, grabbing Lily's hand, pulling her towards the door. But as they turned, it was no longer there. A wall of splintered wood had replaced the doorway, sealing them inside. The moans grew louder, echoing around them, spoken in a language too old for their ears. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he realized they were not merely in a house, but a prison of lost memories, and something was trying to make them a part of it. Heart thudding, he steadied himself. "We have to find another way out," he declared, voice strong even as terror clawed at him. They rushed towards the only other doorway, leading to the unknown, a stairwell spiraling down into darkness. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, heavy and filled with dread. What lay below? Was it salvation, or something far worse? As they descended, the air thickened, pulling at their lungs. Richard glanced back once, catching sight of a flickering shadow darting behind them. It was there, watching, and they had unwittingly become its next chapter in the house's twisted story. They had to escape before the past reclaimed them. Would the dark depths hold the answers they desperately sought, or merely a deeper despair? The stairs felt endless, each creak underfoot echoing around them like the house was breathing, alive with ominous intent. Richard tightened his grip on Lily's hand, feeling her small fingers tremble. He turned to Margaret, whose pale face glimmered in the dim blue of the flashlight. "Stay close," he urged again. They reached the bottom landing, and a narrow corridor opened up before them, wall to wall with thick shadows and the smell of damp earth. Richard could feel the ground beneath vibrating subtly, recalling the restless spirit of the house, an unsettling reminder of their potential fate. At the end of the corridor, a heavy door stood ajar, as if beckoning them deeper into the darkness. Richard's heart raced. He hesitated, glancing back towards the stairwell, the only other path trailing back to chaos. But the moans echoed again, louder now, wrapping around him with twisted fingers. They were trapped, and he knew he couldn't go back. With a shaky breath, he reached for the door, pushing it open wider, revealing another room illuminated by a flickering bulb that hung precariously from the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the light, creating a surreal atmosphere. As they stepped inside, Richard's flashlight caught on something, photographs framed on the wall, their glass cracked and dust-covered. "Look!" Lily gasped, taking a step forward. Richard's instinct was to pull her back, but she was already focusing on one picture in particular. It was a group photo, distorted by time, but the faces staring back from the past filled him with unease. Those faces, Richard whispered, heart pounding again. They looked eerily familiar, friends, neighbors, people he thought he recognized from the neighborhood, but he couldn't remember their names. Worse, they were also members of the Green family. Margaret stepped closer, her brow furrowing as she examined another image on the wall. Richard, they were right here. This was their home. Her voice trailed off, struck by the revelation. Suddenly, a high-pitched laugh broke the heavy silence, slicing through the air like a knife. It was an eerie sound, echoing off the walls and sending the hair on Richard's neck standing on end. Lily whimpered, pressing closer to Margaret, her tiny body rigid with fear. "Did you hear that?" Richard whispered, panic flaring in his chest. Before they could process their next move, a loud crash erupted from across the room. The sound of shattering glass. Richard's heart raced as he swung the flashlight towards the noise, illuminating a piece of furniture that had toppled over a battered wooden chair, littered with old dust and fragments of broken glass. What had knocked it down? "Something's here," he breathed, terrifying thoughts racing in his mind. In that moment, the flickering bulb overhead exploded, extinguishing the feeble light. They were thrown into darkness, surrounded by darkness thick as fog. Richard's hands fumbled for Lily, pulling her close, the noise of their rapid breaths competing with hushed whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls surrounding them. "Oh God, what is happening?" Margaret's voice quivered as she turned in circles, clearly unable to find her bearings. Richard felt panic grip him tightly. "Stay together," he commanded, panic sharpening his words. He knelt down to be at Lily's level, voice softening. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." But then, a cold gust swept through the room, saturating the air with a stench of decay. From the shadows, a shape began to take form, faint yet undeniable, a silhouette that shifted and swayed, revealing a face twisted in anguish. "Let us go." The voice was a wisp of sound, hovering ominously around them, and as Richard's body tensed, the full realization crashed into him like a tidal wave. They weren't just trapped in a house. They were in a nightmare, and the past was waking up to claim what it had lost. But in that moment of terror, an instinctual urge to fight surged within him. He would not allow this darkness to take another family not his. He took a deep breath and stood tall, facing the encroaching shadow. Then he heard Lily's small, brave voice cutting through the deafening silence. "Daddy, I can help." Richard's heart stuttered, a mixture of dread and hope unfolding. "What do you mean?" he asked, needing to understand. I saw a light behind the door at the end of the hall." Her words struck him like lightning. If it led to an escape, could it also hold a glimmer of hope? Their next move could be their last or the start of their fight to reclaim freedom. Would it be light or darkness that would greet them as they faced the unknown? The shadows in the room seemed to pulse, and Richard's heart raced at Lily's words. "Behind the door," he echoed, gaining a flicker of hope. "We have to go now." He pulled Lily close, his grip firm yet reassuring, as he scanned the darkness for the hallway. Margaret took a step back, eyes wide with fear. "Richard, what if it's worse?" "Worse than this?" he countered, urgency lighting his voice. "We have no choice." Richard took a deep breath, trying to calm the torrent of panic. The echoes of the haunting laughter still reverberated around them, chilling him to the bone. "Stay close," he ordered, picking up the flashlight again, its beam flickering unnaturally. With a deep resolve, he stepped into the corridor where the unknown beckoned. Each step felt heavy as if the very floor was desperate to keep them trapped. Margaret squeezed Lily's hand tightly, her bravery fighting against the fear that threatened to swallow them whole. Richard's heart ached, he needed to protect them. As they moved closer to the doorway at the end of the hall, a chill ran down Richard's spine. A darkness seemed to breed in that corner, a thick blanket of despair weaving around them. Still, Lily's conviction shone bright. "I can see it," she said, her voice unwavering despite the dark that surrounded them. Just a little further, Richard encouraged softly, feeling a bond of determination build within them. When they reached the door, it stood ajar, as if waiting. Darkness yawned within, inviting them in, and he could sense something alive lurking inside. He glanced back at Margaret and Lily, ready to reassure them, but he found only trepidation reflected in their eyes. "Are we ready?" he whispered, heart thudding in his chest. "Yes," Lily said, her small voice steady. With a firm grip, Richard pushed the door open wider. Inside, a flickering light sputtered above a dusty old table, revealing an ancient-looking trunk. The walls echoed their shallow breaths, and Richard felt a weight lift just slightly. Maybe this was a sign of hope. But as they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them within. "Not again." Margaret gasped, face paling. Richard shot her a reassuring look. "Stay together, we'll find a way." As he approached the trunk, goosebumps prickled along his skin. He hesitated at the sight of initials carved into the worn wood RG. It struck a chord, but he shook it off. With a grunt, he pulled the latch free, and the trunk creaked open, releasing a stale gust of air that smelled of mold and ancient secrets. Inside lay a mixture of treasures and relics, faded photographs, old trinkets, and a tattered notebook. Richard gingerly picked up the notebook, flipping open the brittle pages. What he read sent a chill down his spine. It detailed a family, much like his own, that had lived in the very house they stood in, stories of love, laughter and loss. "There is something here," Richard said, his voice awestruck. "It's their journal. They lived here, just like us." Lily peered over her father's shoulder, her curiosity overpowering her unease. "What happened to them?" Margaret asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "They disappeared," Richard breathed, a dread tightening in his chest. "But it mentions something about a treasure, a way to free the family's souls trapped within these walls. The curse keeps them here, and it's been awakened again." As he read, the shadows around them began to swirl, restless and alive. The air thickened, and heavy whispers filled the space. "What do we do?" Lily urged, clutching her mother's arm. "They may be trapped, but they were a family, just like us. Perhaps we can help them and ourselves," Richard said, determination surging through him. Margaret's voice was shaky, "But how? We give them what they've lost." "We need to finish their story," Richard decided, feeling the weight of the journal in his hands. As they explored the trunk, they uncovered artifacts, objects of love, care, and loss lined the inside. Each item felt more significant than the last, pieces of a puzzle whispering secrets waiting to be solved. One item caught Richard's eye, a small key, its surface polished and gleaming, as if untouched by time. "Maybe this unlocks something," he suggested. He turned to Lily and Margaret. "We need to give them a chance to move on. We'll find whatever they want us to find." With resolve, Richard led them back to the door. He laid a hand against it, feeling the vibrations racing through. "On the count of 3, he said, crossing his fingers around the key. 1, 2, 3. He flung the door open. The corridor was alive with movement, shadows swirling frantically, trying to resist the blinding beam from Richard's flashlight. He stumbled into the hall, with the others close behind. The sounds of their footsteps melded with the whispers of the past, forging an invisible tie. "Where do we go?" Lily asked, her tiny voice trembling. Richard looked toward the end of the hall. "Follow me." They raced down the passage, every heartbeat resonating through the age-old structure. Suddenly, the growl of the malevolent presence echoed through the walls like a thunderous roar. "It's coming for us," Margaret shouted. "Keep going," Richard urged, a surge of determination propelling him forward. As they reached a door marked with a faded symbol, Richard knew that whatever lay inside held the key to breaking the curse. He pushed it open, feeling an energy ripple through the air, tickling his skin. Inside was bright, a stark contrast to the rest of the house, a sanctum untouched by darkness. A flickering spirit materialized before them, resembling the family from the photographs. Richard's heart sank and lifted all at once, their eyes filled with longing. "You've come to help," one of the specters breathed, the words flowing like a soft wind. "What do you need?" Richard asked, his voice cracking under the weight of their presence. "Release us," the specter whispered, "with love, let the past be buried. Show that you care." Suddenly, warmth enveloped him, a memory surfaced of his own family, their laughter, their love. "We'll do it," he vowed. "We'll honor your memory and free you." Margaret and Lily joined him, their hearts unified. They focused on the treasured objects they had brought, placing them in a circle on the floor. With trembling hands, they formed a bond, a shared love that transcended time. "You're not alone," Lily whispered, a spark igniting within the room, filling it with a golden light. The spirits began to shimmer, their expressions shifting from sorrow to warmth. "Thank you," they chorused, their voices harmonizing into a divine melody. As the light grew, Richard felt a rush of energy surge through, an unshackling of the burdens that had weighed on him since they first arrived. The energy enveloped them all, bathed in warmth as a radiant beam shot up through the ceiling. The shadows fell back, retreating like a tide. And then it happened, an ethereal burst of energy erupted from the circle, flooding the room in a wave of light. Richard watched in awe as the spirits of the family slowly dissolved into stars, a constellation of hope etched against the dark void surrounding them. They looked at each other, astonished yet relieved. "Did we do it?" Margaret whispered in disbelief. As the last of the light faded, they stood in silence, the eternal heaviness lifted. They had freed the family, and in turn, freed themselves from their own burdens. They glanced back, the dark energy no longer looming, the shadows had vanished, leaving peace in their wake. Richard and his family, forever bound through speed bumps and dark corners, realized that love could conquer even the heaviest curses. In that moment, they understood that home wasn't just a place, it was the love that anchored them, an invincible bond that would eternally guide them forward. "Let us go home," Richard said, glancing around the empty house that had transformed from darkness to light. They turned and walked toward the door, stepping out into the embrace of dawn, a brand new day ahead of them. As they stepped into the light, there was a deep breath of fresh air, a confirmation of new beginnings and new adventures waiting just outside their fingertips. Before they drove away, Margaret turned to Richard, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. "We can start over," she whispered, taking Lily's hand. Together, Richard agreed, heart full, ready for whatever the future held. But before heading off, they gathered at the edge of the lot, glancing back one last time at the old station. An eerie silence hung over it, but it felt lighter now, like it was finally at peace. As they drove off into the dawn, a sense of unshakable hope lingered in the air, a promise that they could let go of the past and embrace the future together. Now it's your turn. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories filled with magic and love. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and keep the light shining. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this incredible conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this journey of transformation and hope. Your support means everything, and only true fans understand the importance of keeping this community alive.